that today we have a Gnostic movement in the masses, right? In the anonymous masses, which is the exact psychological counterpart of the Gnostic movement 1900 years ago. And so, as you'll see today, this is true. Especially, there was a Gnostic master by the name of Samael Onveor, and he began to teach Gnosticism and brought Gnosticism back in a practical form, not just from a scholastic point of view, but from a practical way. I think most of us are familiar with the word Gnosis and Gnosticism, mainly from a scholastic point of view, and we know that they were a group of people, right, that that flourished spiritually during the first few centuries, between the after the year 30, right, AD, all the way up to the year the 400s, right, the fourth and fifth centuries, and they were very unique, very interesting. It was a very interesting spiritual branch that sort of emanated or were born from or inspired by the teachings of Jesus, right? So they consider themselves Gnostic Christians. And so, but as we'll see, the Gnostics, just like every single spiritual tradition, okay, they believed that all human beings have a divine nature, right? Have a divine origin, and that so basically, the Gnostics have this perspective that we are only here temporarily, right? That we came here with a mission, and we have, in a way, forgotten about that mission. And it's sort of like when you go out to, even in our house, sometimes we walk into a room, we forget why we're in the room, right? And so, on a spiritual level, we came from the realm of the light, right? And we came here to experience life in this form, manifesting in this form. As to the details of that, obviously, we'll talk about later. But the point that the Gnostics make is that we descended all the way from the spiritual realm, and that we forgot about our spiritual realm and became lost in this world of relativity, of duality, and we lost the true objective perception of ourselves and of our inner being, right? And so Gnosis, the word Gnosis comes from the Greek word, and it means knowledge. And so the Gnostics believe that there is this this divine knowledge, right? That when we remember this knowledge, or when we re-encounter this knowledge, it helps us to reawaken our spiritual potentialities, right? This is expressed very well by Manly P. Hall here in his book. In one of his books, this one's the one about the secret teachings of all ages, a wonderful book. And he says, right, the Gnostics held that the essential nature of the human is divine. They look upon men and women as gods and goddesses who have forgotten who they are, right? And it's from this predicament that the Gnostic aspires to be freed by Gnosis, right? Or to be saved, right, by Gnosis. And so Gnosis is this type of transcendental knowledge, and even more than just knowledge or information. It is a state of being that takes us to or relinks us, right, to the to our spiritual nature, right? And I use the word relink specifically because we believe that that's really the purpose of all of the religions around the world, right? The word religion comes from the Latin root, which means religare, which is to relink. So again, and in the yoga tradition, for instance, the word yoga comes from the word yug, which means, again, the same, to bind, to reunite. And so at the core, right, there is all of these spiritual traditions are teaching us about how to reunite ourselves with our spiritual nature, right? And so um, in this way, we say that any sort of system or religious tradition or spiritual tradition that has these core sort of values can be considered Gnostics, right? And so I'm going to expand a little bit this concept of who were or who are the Gnostics, because again, the Gnostics were not just this group of different spiritual groups that flourished during the first four centuries, but that Gnostics, if we actually study history carefully, we can see that um, Gnostics were before Jesus and continued to be after Jesus, even up until these times, right? And so again, the word gnosis means knowledge, right? And so it is a type of universal knowledge that everyone can tune into with specific spiritual techniques. And this is why we learn different um, spiritual practices from different traditions, meditation, prayer, right? Shamanic journeys, and so forth. And we'll go over that. We'll share some of those spiritual practices here throughout this course. And the main, sort of the main practice of the Gnostics is inner meditation and prayer, right? So then Gnosticism, according to Francisco Garcia Bazan, is any group or any spiritual group or any person really that believes in the presence of a spark or a flash in man that comes from the divine, right? So anyone that believes, or any group that believes that we have a spiritual principle, right? A spiritual or divine principle, as Manly Pujol says, right, within us here, that is sort of uh, in a way trapped in a world of relativity and duality, and we know that there is something more. That's, you can say, a Gnostic thought, a Gnostic principle, right? And then there is the belief that that divine spark must be awakened, right, um, by the human aspect, okay, and it's an interplay or you can say a relationship, a mission between the soul and God, the soul and divinity, the soul and our spiritual nature, right? And between the two, we begin to um, sort of reconnect, relink, right? So in the process of what we call the process of self-realization or spiritual awakening, the human rises and becomes spiritual or becomes divine, and the divinity humanizes, right? Which is sort of the mystery of the Christ with the resurrection and the death and all that. That being a human, Jesus being a human being, becomes a God, and then ascends to the realm from where he came from, right? And this is why the Christ is sort of that ultimate archetype that Gnostics have used, because the Christ is just another one of those spiritual masters that we've seen throughout history, that come to remind us of our spiritual nature and invite us to reintegrate ourselves with that divinity, right? And so and for that we need the experience. We need to actually do something more than just read books, right, and listening to lectures. We need to actually do something, right? And so that's why we say that in Gnosis in itself is, as it says here, the mystical science of inner knowledge, right? Gnosis is a word that means knowledge, but it's more than just information. It's a type of knowledge that comes from direct experience, right? And so in the current Gnostic movement, the contemporary Gnostic movement, which was born in the previous century around the 1940s, we talk about the difference between belief, theories, and faith, and that true faith is the result of the experience that comes or that is born from the theory, right? And so the theory, if anything, opens possibilities for us, but it is up to us to experience those possibilities, right? When we receive this information and we put it to practice, and you experience something, then Gnosis becomes alive within you, right? The knowledge, the truth, the Tao, as they talk about it in the Eastern tradition, you embody the Tao, you embody the truth, right? It's no longer a theory. And so that's what true Gnosis is, in a way, is direct experience, as Master Samuel explains here, experiential knowledge or direct experience of the fundamental truths of existence, right? And so, as he says, real knowledge, real Gnosis or knowledge comes from the conscious experience of the truth of life, of death, and all of the mysteries that surround us, right? And the our multidimensional aspect, right? And so this is what we're here to learn, right? Gnosis in itself is also is referred to as this inner spark or yearning that is what is pushing every one of us to search for the truth, to search for this knowledge, right? Um, as Master Samal puts it beautifully here, Gnosis, in essence, beyond just knowledge, is a profound superior emotion that leads us to the search for all that is beautiful and sublime, right? It is an emotion, it is a yearning that comes deep from within you that pushes you to find knowledge, to get in touch with the truth, right? And we see this, obviously we see this all the time. For instance, when you um, this is why we say that everyone is a Gnostic at heart. And sometimes people ask me, so you teach something, what is it that you teach, what are you? And I say, well, I'm a Gnostic. You know, what's Gnostic? Well, a Gnostic is someone that's searching for knowledge, right? And so in that way, I think we're all Gnostics, because we're all looking for that liberating knowledge, right? That will help us um, to experience life more fully, right? To expand our perceptions of ourselves and of the world, right? Um, and so, yeah, that's why I think, again, everyone is sort of a Gnostic at heart, right? We're all looking for knowledge. And this is why you'll see, and I'll mention this at the end, but the foundations of Gnosticism can be seen, or we can find Gnosticism in different ways, right? We see Gnosis in art, we see Gnosis in philosophy, Gnostic manifesting itself through the sciences, and Gnosticism obviously in through religion, right? Let me just say hello to Garnell and everyone else that's joining us. Yvette, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Um, feel free to use the chat, by the way, as any questions arise. Just type the question there. You can send it to the group, or you can send it privately to me if you don't, if you want a private question. And when I receive private questions, I read it without saying, who wrote the question, obviously, and then I'll just answer the question. So as I say things, I know that sometimes questions arise. Feel free to just put them on the chat, and then I'll go through them. And then we'll also have some questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Okay, so okay, yes. So where were we? So Gnosis, right? So now we're going a little bit more personal, right? So we're going to try to understand what Gnosis is, not just from a sort of historical and philosophical perspective, or aspect rather, but from a personal aspect. Because like I said, like I was just saying, right, Gnosis lives within everything. Gnosis lives within all of us. And this is why one of the Gnostic precepts is found at the oracle of the Temple of Delphi, right? And there's an inscription there that says, "Man, know yourself, and you will know the universe and the gods." Right. So in other words, sort of like I think the psychologist sort of took that, right? As we understand ourselves, as we get to know ourselves deeply, we begin to understand others. We begin to know others, and so you begin to better comprehend the world around you, right? And so this is why in Gnosticism, that's sort of the primordial tenets. You begin by bringing your awareness into yourself, bringing awareness of who you are to discover to rediscover, right, who you really are, and rediscover all of these many aspects of yourself that need that have always been there, but we've sort of forgotten about. And that's both the what you can consider good and bad, right? Both light and darkness, which we all have within ourselves, because from a Gnostic perspective, we are the world and the world is within us, right? And we are within the world and the world is within us. And so everything that we experience, as Friedrich Nietzsche said, right, as long as you experience the stars as something above you, you're lacking the eye of knowledge. So in other words, right, we are not separate from the world around us, or from the stars, or from the gods that we read about in the different traditions, right? As Jesus was inviting us to follow him, right, to be like him. And so in this way, Gnosticism is also very similar to Buddhism, because in Buddhism, the whole purpose of Buddhism is what? To um, to connect with the truth, right? Which they call enlightenment or self-realization. But it begins by, and the Buddha said, well, in order to find the truth, I have to find it within myself, because I believe that I have the truth within myself. The truth is out there, but it's also within us, right? And it's more accessible when we have within ourselves, right? And so Master Samael also says, right, in this beautiful quote, he says that Gnosis is a very natural function of the consciousness, right? And we'll talk about what the consciousness is later. We're going to get into the mysteries of the consciousness around class number 10. But Gnosis in itself, like I said, right, it's this yearning, this impulse that's a natural function of your consciousness. And it's also a universal philosophy. That's what that means. Philosophia perennis et universalis, right? It's a universal philosophy that can be seen, can be found in every single spiritual tradition. So no matter where you come from, whether you grew up as a Christian, as a Catholic, in the Jewish tradition, as a Buddhist, as a Hindi, Muslim, all traditions have Gnostic foundations. All traditions have a universal foundation. But you can say all religions are, all religions are born from within this one universal cosmic truth, which we call Gnosis, the Buddhists call the Tao, and so forth, right? We talk about in Gnosticism, we talk about the difference between spiritual principles and spiritual or religious principles and religious forms, right? Most of us see the external aspect of a religion and we say, oh, this one is different than this one because these guys worship a cross and these guys worship the statue of a Buddha, right? And these guys don't believe in any images. Or these ones, like, you know, let's say the Celtics or the natives, right? They worship nature and so forth. But at the core, right, all of those different spiritual forms or religious forms are different expressions of those spiritual principles, right? And again, when we study all of the different traditions, that's why you'll see at the core, right, at the very foundation, they all teach about love. They all teach about being a good person, about awakening our spiritual nature, right, and so forth. And so this is why, and here's where it's very interesting, because we've, as I was saying just before I said this, so you can find Gnosticism everywhere, right? When you really begin to see, and when you learn to really distinguish between religious forms and spiritual principles, you begin to see that this knowledge has been with us forever, right? It from the beginning of time has up until now, it has always been here with us in different ways, in different forms, manifesting in India as Brahmanism, as Buddhism, in the Middle East as Judaism, as Christianity, right, and so forth. So again, that cosmic truth has been expressing itself, manifesting itself throughout millennia, to always give each individual, no matter where they are, an opportunity, right, to reconnect, to go back to their origin, right? And this is why we believe that all religions, as Master Samal says, all religions are precious jewels in the golden thread of divinity, right? All religions serve a purpose, and there is no such thing as a bad religion. There is the problem that we have is that human beings begin to use religion for power and for things that were not really originally intended, right? And that's the problem. So let's learn to begin to separate, right, the misuse of religious forms and religious principles and religious principles in themselves. Okay. And so Master Samuel explains here, right? Gnosis is the eternal cosmic principle clothed in the religious forms of each race, people, or culture, right? It is a doctrine which allows the sincere seeker to discover the essence of universal knowledge, right? So Gnosis is a doctrine, right? It's a philosophy that allows us to remember, to reconnect with the essence of universal knowledge, right? With our with that, to awaken that aspect of ourselves that connects us with the universal truth, right? And there is actually a very interesting book out there. It's called The Secret History of the World, and the author Mark Booth actually talks about this, and he says that this knowledge, right, this knowledge has always been there throughout history, sometimes hidden and sometimes in plain sight. Um, but humanity always struggles with connecting with this knowledge, and it's because this knowledge has always sort of been given to those that really seek it, right? It's not a knowledge that that is just propagated everywhere. It is a knowledge that sort of comes to the person when the person is ready, as they say in the Zen tradition, right, in the Buddhist tradition, that the master arrives when the student is ready, right? And so, yeah, in this book, he says, right, this ancient and universal philosophy has been hidden from the public, and at other times it has been placed in plain view, though always in such a way as to remain unrecognized by outsiders. So in other words, right, it's like this knowledge has always been here in front of us, but we haven't been trained to see, right? And the Jesus has a very interesting take on this in the when he says, I'm going to read you another quote by him, but before, Joseph Campbell, right, he says that the myth is a secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into the human cultural manifestation. So in other words, this truth, this universal cosmic truth, has always manifested in the minds, in the consciousness of those beings that have prepared themselves to acquire this knowledge, right, in symbolism, right? And symbolism is the language of the mystery schools, right, as we'll see. Or in other words, archetypes, symbols, is the language of God. It's the language of divinity, right? Divinity, the truth, has a different language than we use. And so it's constantly trying to communicate with us through symbols, through archetypes. And we'll talk a little bit about this more. I'm preparing a lesson, a class on the Egyptian tarot. And in there we talk about, right, how there are different ways in which God or divinity communicates with us. One of those ways is through dreams, through visions, right? As you've seen from the different spiritual masters. And another way through which divinity um, speaks to us or connects with us is through symbolism, through the tarot, through um, the different forms of oracle or fortune telling that we have, right? Um, and so, of course, it's everywhere. It's all around us, and all we have to do is to learn to see, right? And this is why I specifically chose this this passage from the Bible, as Jesus said to them. Um, and sorry, there's a backstory to this, right? Because uh, Jesus' disciples realized that Jesus would speak differently to them, to his close disciples, as than to the masses, right? When he would give sermons, he would speak in parables to the masses. He would say, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, right? The kingdom of heaven is like so and so, and this and that." And he would give parables, symbols, right? But when he would speak to his disciples, he would just speak to them directly. And you can see this more specifically in the Gnostic Gospels of Nag Hammadi and all of those sacred books or Gospels that didn't make it to the official Bible, right? For a reason, of course, because the Gnostics or this knowledge has always been sort of suppressed, because it is a liberating knowledge, right? And when you the Gnostics were revolutionaries, right? They were they didn't bow to any sort of power or law external, but only to the one God, to the universal God that is found within all of us. And so it's very hard to control a group that thinks that way, right? Um, and that's sort of another one of those Gnostic concepts that were sort of specific to or more famous in those Gnostics in those Gnostic groups. But anyway, so Jesus said to them, "It has been given to you, right, to his closest disciples, to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor they understand," right? So again, even when the knowledge is right in front of you, we don't see it, we don't recognize it, because we have not been trained to see it, right? And so that's why we say that, or that's why the Gnostics believe that Gnosis is this sort of liberating knowledge, right? That once we are revealed this knowledge, first obviously physically by a teacher, by a master, and then most importantly internally, that's when the true revelation comes, when we're able to experience, right, the things that the masters are saying us, right? And so then he says, "And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their eyes are hard, their ears, sorry, their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them," right? And then he says, "So blessed are you, for your eyes see, and your ears for they hear. For assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it," right? And so even Jesus right away is sort of teaching us that there is this sort of knowledge, right, or insight that is reserved for a specific group of people, right? Not because they're special, because they're special in a way, but not because they belong to a certain family or a certain social group, right? Um, it is reserved to those that have made efforts to to attain this knowledge, right? It is reserved for those that have been working on opening their ears, on opening their eyes, right? Which again, it's about opening our perceptions, right? Those of us that are working on perceiving the world clearly, right? On again, on expanding our awareness, not on not for those that are simply looking for information, for power, um, to control others, to manipulate others, and so forth, right? And so this is a very important thing. This is why this is what Mark Booth means when he says that the knowledge has always been remains unrecognized by outsiders. So those outsiders is the uninitiated, right? Those have not been that have not been initiated into the mysteries. Okay, and so throughout history, we've had this has been, or this secret teaching, this secret knowledge has been kept sort of secret, or not necessarily secret, but outside of the public arena by these so-called mystery schools, of which the Gnostic, the contemporary Gnostic movement is a part of, right? So we are a school of mysteries because we study the mysteries, right? We study the mysteries of life, of the human consciousness, of the human spirit. And so this knowledge has always been sort of, again, sort of kept there for those that really search for it, right? And so Manly P. Hall says the mysteries were organized for the purpose of assisting the struggling human creature to reawaken the spiritual powers which, surrounded by the flaming ring of lust and degeneracy, lay asleep within his soul, right? In other words, man was offered a way by which he could regain his lost state. And so again, that's the purpose of the Gnostic teachings, right? To help us reawaken that spiritual nature um, that the Gnostics believe that we have, that it's within the universe and within ourselves as well, right? And and this is a process of, as I was saying before, not just an intellectual process, but most importantly, an inner process, right? And for that, this concept of revelation is not just an intellectual revelation or sharing of information, but rather, like I said before, that the theory is the only usefulness or purpose of the theory of the teachings is to help us um, come to an experience of something, right? And that's what true gnosis is. We say that Gnosticism has two fundamental pillars: the what's called the tradition and revelation. Okay, as Rafael Vargas explains in his book Gnosis, Tradition and Revelation, he says Gnosticism is not only about believing a certain doctrine received by the tradition or by a master, but to rise to the intimate revelation and to confirm in oneself the reality of that doctrine, right? So a true Gnostic is one who not only calls himself Gnostic because he reads Gnostic texts, right? Um, but a true Gnostic is one who is experiencing gnosis within him, right? And in Buddhism, they use the term self-realization and also the term the illuminating void, which you might have heard of. And they they talk about the difference between, for instance, experiencing the illuminating void, having a temporary experience of the oneness of the illuminating void through meditation or through any other spiritual practice. And so there's a difference between experiencing God, experiencing divinity, experiencing the illuminating void for a few moments, and then returning to your body, quote unquote, and realizing the void within you, or in other words, to uh, to experience a temporary state of enlightenment or a permanent state of enlightenment, right? And so there's a difference. And here in the in the contemporary Gnosticism, we refer to this, right, the importance of both. And unfortunately, and this is sort of where the contemporary Gnostic movement that you're encountering now, um, that was born from the teachings, the Gnostic teaching, the teachings of the Gnostic master Samuel Vior in the previous century, differ from those that study Gnosticism in the universities, right? You can say that the scholars study the tradition, right? Their philosophy, their way of living, and so forth. But hardly ever do they actually encounter the revelatory aspect of Gnosis, right? And that's what's even more important, because otherwise we are just living with a bunch of theories, but we don't actually change, right? And one thing that in Gnosticism we're interested in is change, right? Is awakening, okay? And so for that, we need to actually do something more than just read, more than just listen to lectures, watch videos on YouTube, right? Which is the new thing. We actually need to practice, right? We need to learn different spiritual techniques, meditation, prayer, all of these things that can, all of the different traditions really sort of synthesize in meditation, in mindfulness, self-observation, all of those things, right? Okay, and so then this is why the mission of Gnosticism in this age is to just provide um, those practices, right, that are going to help each one of us to have that experience, to connect with that revelatory aspect, right? As Master Samal explains here, the mission of Gnosticism in this age, and really in all of the different ages, has always been to deliver the methods and means for the work of the realization of the inner man in each one of us. And that obviously that word man is generic, right? Human beings. And the attainment of this transcendental objective depends on our cooperation with the being. The word being is in Gnosticism is the word that we use for God, for our inner divinity, right? And from a Gnostic perspective, there is the supreme divinity, right? There is that one universal God or divinity, which we all came from, but we all have an inner monad or inner spirit or guiding spirit, right? And that's what in Gnosis we call the being. Okay, and so that's another sort of Gnostic terminology, and later on we're going to get into the um, the perspective of divinity that separates the Gnostics from the rest of the groups, right? And it's that, and really when you study religions, all religions thoroughly, you will notice that they all talk about two different types of divinities, right? The one supreme divinity, in the words of in the Gnostic terms, is the agnostos theos, or the unknown God, right? Because there is an aspect, a state of being from which everything that we know and that can be perceived came from, right? And that has no name. It cannot be explained with words. There are no concepts that that express what that is, right? And so in you can see a direct link there between the Gnostics and the Taoists, the Gnostics and the Buddhists, right? That again, that the Tao, as they say, the Tao that can be explained is not the Tao, right? And so in other words, the Gnostics would say the God that can be explained is not the real God. And so that's why you've probably heard the term the demiurge, right? The Gnostics, basically the Gnostics believe that we sort of enter into this realm by mistake. We were searching for something, and we walked into this place by mistake, and then we became trapped in this state, in this state or realm, right? Because the different dimensions and different worlds are just states of being, really. And so that there is this supreme divinity from which we all came from and that we yearn to return. But when we came to this realm, what we call the universe, there are these gods uh, or beings that um, are sort of in charge of creation, right? Those are, and they manifest in the world as the various laws of nature, like gravity, right? Like electricity, like uh, whatever, magnetism, right? All of these laws are expressions of these gods that sort of maintain the world as it is. And so the Gnostics see the two divinities, right? The one true divinity and this sort of false divinity that most of us worship. And so again, um, the God that can be explained is not the real God, right? Or the divinity, that the true divinity is that which is beyond concepts. It's that which is beyond the mind, and and that's why we need to the only way to experience it is through the heart, right? And that's why the Gnostics um, sort of their main practice was meditation, was prayer, right? Because it is God is a matter of experience. God is a state of being, not just this external force that's sitting up in a cloud, watching everything that we do and so forth, right? And so the Gnostic divinity is is it's very different from the, or well, not different, but they focus more on the transcendental divinity, and most traditions usually focus on the god that's referred to as Jaldabaoth, or the god, the creator god or creator gods, um, because really even the Christian tradition, they believe in many gods and so forth, even though we might not see it this way because we haven't really read the Bible carefully enough, and without these new concepts, so we haven't been able to see. But you can see right there in the Bible, right in the first book of Genesis, sorry, the second book of Genesis, um, where God says, "Let us create Adam, or let us create men according to our image," right? um, right there, you can see that there are different gods. If it was one God, why would he say, let us? Who is us, right? So he's referring, so Moses is telling us in code that there is a host of gods that created men, right? And for Gnostics, those host of gods are not the true God, the true divinity, and that's why they aspire to reconnect with the true divinity, which is the Father that Jesus was talking about, right? Our Father who art in heaven, right? He was talking about our one true Father who unites us all right? Okay, and then lastly, as I mentioned before, Gnosticism has four pillars or foundations, and those are science, art, philosophy, and mysticism, right? Without those, they are sort of incomplete. And that's why the Gnostic teachings are based in the communion between science, art, philosophy, and mysticism. They seek to rescue the highest values of the human being in order to be able to comprehend that life is empty without the pursuit of transcendence and the self-realization of the being. Okay. And so this is why I always try, you'll notice throughout this course, that, and it's very interesting because science now has even been able to sort of corroborate a lot of the things that the different spiritual traditions have been saying all along, right? Um, and so it's actually, it's very interesting to see that. Um, so Gnosis in science, right? There's a way for us to corroborate all of the information. We can't be true Gnostics without corroborating information. We're not here to just take in information because, you know, Christian said so, or because someone else said so, or because Jesus said so, right? We'll take that information, And the key is to become scientists and to corroborate, right, whether that is true or not, right? Um, and we do this by saying, all right, well, hey, Jesus, you said this. Well, how do you experience that? And he says, well, pray to your Father, right? Sit, pray to your Father, enter into prayer, and you will be able to see this. And so if we do that, we should be able to experience or come to the same conclusions that Jesus did, right? And so what do? We're scientists, right? Um, we we practice the types of meditations, the types of spiritual practices that these masters used or practiced to acquire the experience. And so we practice that. And the more that you practice, you'll notice, right, that you will actually begin to um, have similar experiences. And this is why everyone that meditates, everyone that prays, they all have similar experiences. They all begin to experience certain common things, right? Like most people that meditate begin to feel more at peace, right? Begin to feel more aware of themselves, more aware of their thoughts, of their emotions, of their actions, and therefore they begin to have more control, right, of their emotions, of their thoughts, of who they are, right? Um, and so these are the kind of things that we're going to um, explore in this program. And yeah, so this is just, again, a brief introduction into what Gnosticism is. As you've noticed, I didn't really go into the historical aspect of Gnostics because I believe that there is plenty of information out there, on YouTube and books that you can read. I wanted to share with you something that not everyone is saying, right? To how to recognize Gnosis um, wherever you are, right? Which I think it's something that not many scholars actually talk about, right? This concept that it wasn't only the Christian Gnostics who were Gnostics, but um, the Greeks were Gnostics, the Romans were Gnostics, the ancient Egyptians were Gnostics at heart, the ancient um, Jewish people were Gnostics as well, right? Because again, they all got in touch. They were all able to experience this universal truth, and then they express this universal truth in their own language with their own symbols and so forth. And when you compare, right, the visions that Jesus had, that the Buddha had, that Moses had, that Muhammad had, they all share something in common, right? They all seem to share a lot of things, right? So, okay, I want to open up the room to any questions, any comments that you guys might have before we go into the meditation. So, any questions or comments?